October 1944. The Pacific Ocean, a grand stage upon which the largest naval battle in history is about to unfold. A heavy fog hangs over the water, mixed with smoke from thousands of engines. Every wave, every gust of wind seems tense. Something is coming. The United States has launched an operation to retake the Philippines. After 2 years of grueling battles, General MacArthur is finally fulfilling his promise. I shall return. The landing on Leyte Island is the key to victory across the entire Pacific front. But in the shadows, an answer is taking shape. The Imperial Japanese Navy, not yet broken, launches Operation Shogo. Admiral Takeo Kurita leads into battle 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Everything Japan has left that can still strike back. The centerpiece of his force is the colossal Yamato, weighing 70,000 tons. Her guns fire shells that weigh nearly 1.5 tons, so massive that no ship in the world could withstand them. This machine symbolized Japan itself, its power, discipline, and faith in the impossible. For the Japanese, this was more than just a battle. It was an act of self-sacrifice in the name of the Emperor. Kurita's mission was to break through to the Leyte landing, destroy the transport ships, and drive the Americans back into the sea. But standing between him and his objective was a small group of ships, one that no one had ever taken seriously. In the eastern part of the archipelago, a small group of American ships is on patrol, Task Unit 77.4.3, known simply as Taffy 3. These ships were not part of the main striking force. Their mission was to provide air cover for the landings, hunt submarines, and support the invasion with aircraft launched from their escort carriers. 6 carriers and 3 destroyers, a pitiful force against the enemy's battle line. Yet on their decks serve thousands of men who believe in their duty. They are commanded by Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, an officer with a cool mind and a human heart. He knew his ships were never meant to face battleships, but orders are orders. Guard the waters east of Leyte. Aboard the destroyer USS Johnston, young sailors check the torpedoes. Their commander, Lieutenant Commander Ernest Evans, is a man of energy and courage, someone who believes in duty until the very end. This ship will go in harm's way. That's what he said at the launch of the Johnston. And he was right. On the St. Lo, technicians prepare the planes for another mission. On the Kalinin Bay, mechanics clean the deck guns. Everyone believes today will be just another ordinary day, as long as the radio stays silent and the sea remains calm. October 25th, 06:37 a.m. The fog is so thick that the navigation posts aboard the carriers can barely see the ends of their own decks. The radios crackle with static. Sailors hear a distant rumble, thunder perhaps, or something far greater. On the radar of the Fanshawe Bay, signals begin to appear. At first, they assume it's Taffy 2, friendly ships. But within moments, the truth becomes clear. Out of the mist emerge dark silhouettes crowned with massive gun turrets. The first muzzle flash from the Yamato tears apart the morning sky. 4 60mm shells crash into the ocean just a few hundred meters from the carriers. The water erupts in towering columns. The blast wind sweeps everything from the decks. For the first time in history, the Americans witness a full broadside from the Yamato. "Those aren't ours," shouts the signalman. A message bursts over the radio. Enemy surface force, battleships closing fast. Admiral Sprague realizes that his small group has come face to face with the main strength of the Imperial fleet. He orders smokescreens to be deployed and commands every aircraft to launch, even those without weapons. Pilots take off through fog and fire, climbing into the chaos above. Below, the destroyers turn toward the enemy. Thus begins one of the most unbelievable stories in naval history. When the first Japanese salvos exploded in the water beside the carriers, the captain of the USS Johnston, Lieutenant Commander Ernest Evans, understood that every minute now mattered. The bridge was silent, only the rumble of the engines and the hiss of the radio. "All ahead flank, lay smoke and attack," Evans said quietly, and the entire crew heard their fate. A destroyer of just 2,000 tons moved to challenge a fleet of 200,000 tons of steel. At 0658, the Johnston plunged into the thick smoke it had laid itself, vanishing from the carrier's sight. Speed, 28 knots. On the horizon, the silhouettes of giants. From less than 10 kilometers away, Evans gives the order. Fire torpedoes. Silver trails streak across the waves. A few seconds of breathless waiting, and then a flash. The heavy cruiser Kumano takes a direct hit. Her bow is blown apart, and she falls out of formation. The Japanese response is immediate. A storm of shells rains down on the Johnston. Thick smoke, blistering heat, and a deafening roar. One shell punches through the superstructure. Another destroys the forward gun turret. Evans is wounded, his left arm shattered, but he remains on the bridge. He steers with one hand, bloodied, gripping the wheel. A bullet rips through his cheek, yet he keeps giving orders. "Keep firing as long as you can see the bastards." The Johnston closes in, firing every gun still working. One Japanese observer would later say, "It looked like a ship gone mad. It came straight at us, firing until it vanished into the smoke." The ship burns, its engines sputtering, but it manages to save one of the carriers by drawing enemy fire. By 0945, the Johnston is dead in the water. The crew abandons ship, and the captain remains behind. His final order: abandon ship. A few minutes later, the ship disappears beneath the waves. Of the 327 crew members, only half will survive. Later, historians will call this charge the most courageous act in the history of the U.S. Navy. When the Johnston disappeared into the smoke, the destroyer Hermann followed. From the bridge, Captain Amos Hauser watched as plumes of shellfire erupted across the water. For a moment, the sea turned into a boiling chaos of fire and steel. The Hermann was the only destroyer still carrying a full load of torpedoes. She lined up for an attack run against the battleship Congo. 3 torpedoes streaked from their tubes. 2 missed, but 1 detonated beneath the stern of a Japanese cruiser. The massive ship lost propulsion and fell out of the fight. Meanwhile, the small escort ship Samuel B. Roberts charges straight ahead. She weighs only 300 tons, about the size of a modern yacht. Her commander, Lieutenant Robert Copeland, knows his ship will not return. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which we will probably not return. But we will do our duty. He pushes the ship to full speed, heading directly toward the cruisers Chokai and Chikuma. From a distance of 7,000 yards, he fires 3 torpedoes. One finds its mark. Chokai erupts in a massive explosion, flames shooting higher than her masts. The Roberts fires every gun until the barrels glow red hot. The crew passes shells by hand. Blood mixes with seawater across the deck. After 2 brutal hours, the battle is over. The Roberts sinks, but leaves behind a legend. Of her 224 sailors, 120 are lost. Yet their attack saves the carriers. While the destroyers fought their desperate battle, chaos consumed the carriers. The Gambia Bay took the first direct hits from Japanese shells. Her deck burned, water poured through gaping holes in her hull. At 08:20, the ship lost power. Her crew sang the hymn as the vessel slipped beneath the waves. On the Kalinin Bay, pilots took off straight through fire and smoke. Many had no bombs left. They used only machine guns and rockets, doing anything they could to distract the enemy. From the sky, pilots drop empty fuel tanks to confuse the Japanese, who mistake them for bombs. They do everything they can. "We attacked with what we had, and that was our courage," one of them later recalled. The White Plains narrowly escapes destruction. One shell pierces her deck but fails to explode. A little more, and the entire group would have been annihilated. By noon, the battle reaches its climax. Admiral Kurita receives conflicting reports. The American ships are fighting too boldly, as if the entire Third Fleet were hidden behind the smoke. He doesn't realize that before him stand only a handful of escorts. Fearing an airstrike and the destruction of his fleet, he gives the order to retreat. The Japanese armada turns away and disappears into the fog. Across the sea echo the whine of damaged engines, the crackle of burning wreckage, and the cries of survivors. The Battle of Samar comes to an end. The Americans lost 2 destroyers, 2 escort ships, and 1 carrier, but they saved the entire landing force. When the battle was over, the ocean was littered with lifeboats. Many sailors spent more than a day in the water before being rescued. They drifted among wreckage, oil slicks, and the bodies of the fallen. Of the 900 men of Taffy 3, more than 500 were lost, but their courage became legend. Newspapers wrote, "The destroyers that fought battleships." Congress awarded dozens of medals, many of them posthumously. At the ceremony, Admiral Sprague said, "They fought beyond the limits of courage, and in doing so, they saved us all." Decades later, in 2021, researchers discovered the wreck of the USS Johnston at a depth of 6,456 meters. The ship rested on the ocean floor as if still ready for battle. Her hull was scarred with shell holes, yet the name Johnston DD-557 remained clearly visible. Modern U.S. Navy destroyers bear the names of the Taffy 3 heroes, Hole, Roberts, and Johnston. Every year, sailors remember that battle, when a handful of ships stood against the impossible. "Courage," Sprague once said, "is not the absence of fear. It's when you stand your ground, even when the sea itself is against you." The battle was over, but for those left in the water, the war was only beginning. The Pacific had become a mirror of catastrophe. Dark oil slicks and drifting wooden rafts stretched for miles. The sun scorched their skin, and the waves rolled over men clinging desperately to debris. From the surviving destroyers and carriers, rescue operations began. Pilots of PBY Catalina seaplanes spotted patches of orange life vests scattered across the sea. They descended almost to wave level, landing in the oil-slicked water to pull aboard the burned and exhausted sailors. One of the survivors later recalled, "We didn't know if our friends were alive. Every wave brought another body, but even in that hell, we saw each other, and we held on." It was more than a day before the first rescue ship arrived. Hundreds had already died from dehydration and sunburn, but those who survived watched the sunrise and understood. They had accomplished the impossible. When news of the battle reached America, widows and mothers began receiving letters from the Navy Department. The dry phrase, "missing in action," was later replaced by killed in action. But sometimes, envelopes from the Pacific carried different words, living ones, written by trembling hands. "Mom, we met the enemy. We're scared, but I know I'm doing the right thing." Those letters became part of the story of Taffy 3, words that spoke of fear and duty without heroics, as if describing just another day at work. In the survivors' memoirs, they wrote that the hardest moment was the silence. When the engines stopped on the deck and the roar of shells still echoed in their ears, that was when the realization finally came. After the battle, the U.S. Navy Command assessed the losses. Taffy 3 had lost 5 ships and more than 500 men. The Japanese lost 3 heavy cruisers and achieved none of their objectives. At first glance, the numbers seemed small, but strategically, it was a decisive victory. Because of it, the Leyte landing force held its ground, and within a week, the Philippines became the foothold for liberating the entire archipelago. Historians would later compare Taffy 3 to the 300 Spartans at sea, a small band that held back the enemy, buying time for an entire fleet to survive. In the spring of 1945, a ceremony was held in Washington, D.C. Among the families of the fallen stood Ernest Evans's mother. When she was presented with the Medal of Honor, the entire hall rose to its feet. On the wall hung a portrait of Evans with the inscription, "He charged a fleet alone." The ships of Taffy 3 entered the pages of military history. In naval academies around the world, officers study this battle as an example of tactical brilliance and unbreakable morale. In the 1970s, a diorama was unveiled at the U.S. Navy Museum in Washington, a miniature of the Battle of Samar. On it, tiny ships charge toward towering giants, and the plaque reads, "Courage is a force of its own." Decades passed. For a long time, the sea kept its silence. But in 2021, a team of private explorers led by Victor Vescovo discovered the wreck of the USS Johnston at a depth of 6,456 meters. A remotely operated vehicle descended into the darkness, and in the beam of its spotlight, the letters Johnston DD 557 appeared. The paint was still intact, as if it had been applied yesterday. On the bridge, shell casings still lay scattered, and the helm remained fixed in the position ahead flank. This discovery became the deepest shipwreck ever found, and the most silent monument to courage. Today, ships bearing the names Hole, Johnston, Roberts, and Heermann serve in the modern U.S. Navy. On their decks, young sailors know the story of those who came before them. Every October, a memorial service is held at the San Diego Naval Base. Veterans and cadets gather on the deck, and over the ocean a bell tolls 3 times, symbolizing the destroyers of Taffy 3. We weren't special. It's just that when it was time to stand, we stood. His eyes gaze out toward the sea, and for a moment, it seems as if small destroyer silhouettes still move within the waves. The sea forgets names, but it remembers stories. The Battle of Samar remained in the chronicles not just as a tactical anomaly, but as a symbol of human endurance. Where mighty warships vanished into history, small destroyers left a mark that the ages will never wash away.